The icy wind whipped through Main Street as a frail girl dropped to her knees, clutching a battered cloth doll against her chest, the only thing she had left to trade for her dying mother's medicine. All around her, people hurried past, eyes averted, as if her suffering was too small to matter. Then, from across the street, a sleek black car door creaked open, and a man stepped out, carrying something that would change not just her fate, but the future of the entire town. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. 12-year-old Emily Carter stood shivering on the sharp edge of Main Street, the wind slicing through her thin jacket like knives. Her fingers, red and raw, curled tightly around the battered cloth doll pressed to her chest, the last relic of a world she had almost forgotten. Once, the doll had been bright, stitched with love by a father who used scraps of fabric and whatever time he could steal from his 2 jobs. Now, its colors had faded, its seams weakened by years of clinging hands and tear-stained nights. But to Emily, it was more than thread and cotton. It was a fragment of the life she had lost, a talisman against a world that no longer made room for dreams. The townspeople bustled past without meeting her eyes, their breath misting the air, their faces drawn with the same gray fatigue that weighed down the streets. They saw her. Of course they did. But seeing meant responsibility, and responsibility was a burden they could not afford to carry. It was easier to pretend she was just another smudge in the landscape, a stray shadow clinging to the curb. Linda Carter's sickness had begun with a soft cough, easily brushed aside during long shifts at the diner. Emily remembered her mother laughing off the concern, saying, "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just a tickle." But the tickle grew teeth. It became racking coughs that left Linda gasping against the sink, clutching the countertop until her knuckles turned white. The doctor's prescriptions sat gathering dust on the kitchen table, a cruel reminder that even survival had a price tag. Emily's small hands had worked hard to gather coins, scraping ice from sidewalks, dragging a battered wagon door to door with lukewarm lemonade in mason jars. But the coins were never enough. Winter had come early that year, and the cold didn't care about her tears or her empty pockets. That morning, she had stared at the doll for a long time, sitting alone in the small, peeling bedroom she and her mother shared. Part of her wanted to keep it hidden, to bury it away from the cruel logic clawing at her chest. But love, real love, wasn't selfish. Love meant sacrifice. So Emily buttoned her jacket, slipped the doll inside, and set out toward town, carrying her father's memory in her arms and her mother's life in her trembling hands. As she stood there, ignored and invisible, a black car idled across the street. Its windows, dark and impenetrable, gave nothing away. Inside, a pair of eyes watched, a gaze heavy with recognition, with something dangerously close to memory. But Emily didn't see him. She saw only the endless, uncaring march of boots and heels and shopping bags, and she tightened her grip on the doll, willing herself to believe that somewhere, somehow, kindness might still be hiding in this broken, frozen town. Jack Donovan gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other suspended halfway to his coffee cup, forgotten. The bitter aroma of the drink filled the car, but Jack tasted only the coppery sting of old anger rising in his throat. Through the frost-edged windshield, the small figure on the sidewalk looked almost ghost-like, a wisp of humanity clinging to a world too cold to notice. He knew that posture, the hunch of someone carrying the unbearable weight of needing and not daring to hope. He had worn it himself years ago, walking these very streets in shoes with holes so wide the snow bit his feet before the frost could even warn him. Emily Carter didn't know she was reenacting a tragedy Jack had spent his life trying to escape. Or perhaps she knew too well, and the quiet resignation in her every movement was the mark of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. The doll she clutched twisted something inside him, a memory he'd locked behind iron doors. His mother, hands cracked and bleeding from long hours scrubbing floors, pawning her wedding ring for his textbooks. Jack remembered the look on her face when she realized it still wouldn't be enough. The same look Emily wore now. Jack's jaw clenched as he watched her step hesitantly toward the pharmacy entrance. The bell above the door chimed weakly against the wind. Inside, behind a gleaming counter stacked with overpriced vitamins and greeting cards no one really needed, the pharmacist barely looked up. Jack didn't need to hear the conversation. The way the man shook his head, sharp, dismissive, final, spoke louder than words. The way Emily's shoulders sagged, the way her tiny hand offered the doll one last time before pulling it back, those details branded themselves onto Jack's mind like a fresh scar. The coffee cup tipped from his fingers, splashing onto the leather seat without notice. His blood surged in his ears, a drumbeat of guilt and fury merging into something dangerous. He could feel the weight of decades pressing down, the memory of nights spent wondering why help never came, of promises made to a silent ceiling that if he ever had the power, he would never let another child suffer unseen. Now he had the power, and there she was, an echo of himself, standing in the freezing air, bargaining with the only thing she had left. Jack's breath fogged the glass. His hand flexed once on the steering wheel, then dropped. A man could outrun failure, outrun poverty, even outrun the ghosts of his past. But he could not outrun a mirror. He opened the car door. Emily sat hunched on the cold curb, her knees drawn up to her chest, the tattered doll squeezed so tightly against her ribs it seemed to vanish into her threadbare coat. The bitter wind sliced at her cheeks, but it was the weight of hopelessness, not the cold, that numbed her. She blinked rapidly, fighting against the tears that welled and spilled over, blurring the world into a smear of gray boots and rushing coats. People moved around her in currents, too fast, too preoccupied. Their voices just noise, their faces just shadows. She might as well have been invisible. The doll's limp arm dangled from her grasp, flapping weakly in the breeze like a white flag of surrender. A sudden heavy shadow fell across her, blotting out the watery light. Emily tensed, instinctively curling tighter around the doll. But then, slowly, she raised her eyes. A man knelt before her, lowering himself to her level with a strange reverence, as if the act itself were sacred. His face was worn but kind, the kind of kindness that came from scars, not comfort. Without speaking, he reached into his long, dark coat and drew out a thick leather wallet. The air between them seemed to thrum with unspoken gravity as he plucked a card and a slip of paper free and extended them toward her. Emily stared, confused, wary. Her hand trembled as she reached out. She turned the check over, and her heart jolted so violently she thought she might drop it. More zeros than she could comprehend. Enough for medicine. Enough for years of medicine. Enough for things she hadn't dared dream about since her world crumbled. Her lips parted, but no words came. "You remind me of someone," the man said, his voice low, almost a whisper dragged up from a place long buried. "Someone. No one helped when it mattered." Emily's mouth worked, searching for meaning, for footing in this moment that made no sense. I don't understand," she choked. Jack Donovan gave a small, sad smile, the kind a man wears when he sees his own reflection in a shattered mirror. "You will," he said, rising with the slow certainty of a man who had just made an irreversible choice. Before Emily could gather her spinning thoughts, Jack crossed the street in long, purposeful strides. The pharmacy door slammed against the wall as he entered. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow over the stunned patrons and clerks. Jack didn't hesitate. He approached the counter, extracted another check, this one blank, and slammed it down with a crack that made the whole room flinch. His voice, steady and thunderous, cut through the murmuring crowd. "From this day forward, No child in this town will ever be denied medicine because they can't pay. I'll cover every bill, every single one." A beat of stunned silence, then a rush of gasps, the flutter of phones rising into the air like startled birds. The air itself seemed to shift, electric, alive, as whispers raced through the store and out into the street, where they would catch the wind and spread far beyond the sleepy borders of a forgotten town. Emily clutched the check to her chest, the doll cradled in her lap, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that miracles, small, broken, battered miracles, still had a place in the world. Jack Donovan didn't vanish after that day. He didn't retreat behind gates and guards, didn't slip away into the faceless luxury where men of his means usually disappeared. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, walked the battered streets of his childhood, and planted the first seeds of change with his own 2 hands. The first fruit of that promise rose on the cracked corner lot across from the old pharmacy, the place where Emily had once stood invisible to the world. It began as a simple brick building, but it grew into a sanctuary, the Linda Carter Medical Center. No more choosing between food and insulin, no more silent funerals for diseases that could have been cured. Jack made sure of it, quietly, insistently, relentlessly. He named it not after himself, but after a woman he barely knew, a woman whose daughter had reminded him what it meant to owe the world something better than excuses. The town changed with it, slowly at first, like frost thawing under a timid sun. Suspicion and cynicism, deeply rooted from years of broken promises, began to crack. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Emily now nodded, smiled, even stopped to ask about her mother's health. Small kindnesses bloomed in shop windows and school hallways, suspended coffee tabs, coat drives, volunteer rosters swelling with names no one had seen on them in years. And at the center of it all was Emily Carter. The girl who once stood shivering and unseen became the town's quiet heart. Not through speeches or grand gestures, but by simply being there. Living proof that a soul, however battered, could endure, and that kindness, once set in motion, was unstoppable. As for Jack, he found a different kind of wealth in the crumbling town he had once fled. He bought a modest house near the edge of the woods where he had played as a boy, its porch crooked, its paint peeling. He didn't fix everything at once. Some things, he understood now, needed to heal slowly, honestly. He spent his days overseeing the clinic, funding scholarships, rebuilding playgrounds, listening. And Emily? She kept the doll, not hidden away, not locked in a drawer of painful memories, but displayed proudly on a shelf above her bed. A silent witness to the day despair turned into defiance, and defiance into something even stronger: hope. She understood now that hope wasn't born from grand miracles. It was stitched together by small, stubborn acts of love, the kind her father had sewn into every crooked seam of that battered doll, the kind that, in the end, had woken a sleeping giant.